Come on, ye pigs of Western civilization, write more poetry. And you can write poetry about yourself with all the cryptic scripted words for self-identification: name, age, race, sex, religion, or lack thereof informational pseudonyms to correctly identify a barren soul on the rotting highway wrecked to unbeknown infinity. They'll know you by your teeth. They'll know you by your eyes. They'll know you by your self-portrait folded in an empty wallet of poetry and sentimental postcard retrieval. There'll be numbers to call and arrows drawn in static puzzle vernacular. Your body's cold, but your soul's floating through so much ether and foggy Bergman mysteries. The first call responders so entertained by your carefully chosen witticisms and astute reckoning of the human condition will forget to call the ambulance and instead muse over your wandering ponderings over coffee and rainy day side of the road anecdotal pitter-patter of your last few remaining heartbeats. Yeah, write that poetry, boy. Write that shit. And you can write some more poetry about yourself, so your kids will know who you were. All your ups and downs like a broken carnival ride, spinning through funnel cake and popcorn distractions. Your selfless ruminations will make your mother shift uncomfortably at your funeral. But if you tie it all together with ribbons and remembrances, you'll be beatific and cataclysmic, and even the planets will spot you a $10 bill before reborn energy and flowers fuck you out again for another ride. Gather everyone you ever knew and listen as they tell you unconsciously about who you were. You leaving behind a detailed derailed train wreck of apprehensions, descripted brilliantly with an encompassing eulogy of identity. Write that poetry, boy. Write that shit. And you can write poetry about your childhood, over-romanticizing nature realizations and holiday essay pontification. So what if you never rode your bike so fast that the wind chased you around the corner at Grover's Corners and blah, 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 maturation with Top 40 radio? Write like you did. So what if you never delighted in the delight of ice cream? Write like you did. They'll see you grow in the recesses of their mind's eye. Would you play like Carl Sandburg on a fluffy pillow, soft, sterile, and summoning up all that bullshit you were supposed to feel when you were supposed to be feeling it? Write that poetry, boy. Write that shit. And you can write poetry about your parents, placing all your Oedipal problems at their feet. So what if you never wanted to fuck your mother? Tell them you did. It tickles their bow ties and nudges their subconscious. Besides, why wouldn't you want to fuck your mother? It's what all the corner erotic depressants are doing. Emasculate your father for no reason. Give him a drinking problem and a sneer. Misery resonates. Hopeless abandon resonates. Besides, your parents aren't paying for your New York City apartment and Robin Noodle manifesto. They never understood you and they never will. And you're changing your name to O. Henry just to be ironic. Write that poetry, boy. Write that shit. And you can write poetry about adolescence, where everything was incense and Pearl Jam, where you only read by candlelight and got high at Pink Floyd prolific patterns of intoxicated, hallucinated, overstated, hazy motifs. No one wants to hear a poem about you jerking off with one hand on your cock and the other on the slow motion control on a VCO, rewinding Boogie Nights for a glimpse of Heather Graham's bush. There's nothing poetic in that. There's nothing truthful in that. Your truth is our truth, and we need to feel the way that you felt when you were supposed to be feeling it. So tell us instead about circles of flannel and how you fuck you the man in subtle suburban campfire circles of self-mutilation and anything but orgies in your stepfather's basement. Tell us about how you smoked so much pot that you couldn't think and laughed so hard that you smiled for 3 whole weeks. Be adorable. So young and trying to be yourself. So young and innocent, blowing nervous smoke rings of flirtation bubbles while you learn the perks of being a fucking wallflower. Write that poetry, boy. Write that shit. And you can write poetry about your ego. That's a collection in and of itself. And you can write poetry about your superego right after you finish your Intro to Freud course at Delaware Community College. And you can write poetry about all your misplaced Jay Gatsby parties. Share with us how you recklessly abandoned the pontification of a homemade vodka machine, getting so geeked on substances that you finally worked up the courage to tell Anna how much it meant when she looked at you that way, that time, and you felt the way you were supposed to feel. The way Clark Gable felt. The way John Cusack felt when he held up a radio blasting some bullshit song like Romeo and Sneakers. Pretend to know what you're talking about until the taller, better-looking man she came to the party with arrives with a drink of date-rape concoction. Mutter something, adjust your tie, say something about communism quietly, and find a different corner to sip and misquote R.E.M., the second-best wallpaper girl used to get handjobs from. No one wants to hear about drunken stupidness. No one wants to hear about karaoke victories of colleagues from your fucking day job. Besides, you weren't drunk, you were enlightened, and you knew that it would last forever. Parcel your words to a Facebook status, sell it to a Los Angeles pop band for a hit record, and write that poetry, boy. Write that shit. And you can write poetry about someone who died. A friend of yours that you used to drink with and daydream of external hard drive dominance over superficial culture and superfluous dead ends. You threw back the drinks and he threw back too many, but where were you? Picking ghosts off confession leaves? Shedding secrets in Pennsylvania church parking lots or reading pussy in your grandmother's inherited car? Nobody wants to hear about that. Just be edgy, but not macabre. Be autonomous, but not autobiographical. And don't name names unless you're hallmarking a tribute poem for empty bones at a tissue-swapping funeral. Don't embarrass the dead by detailing mistakes and broken promises. The man is a fucking widow. What is wrong with you? Just overstate the facts and downplay the quicker, faster than like cut the black and no more chances to say, I love you. Don't remember how young he was, laughing, hiking up a dark hill, pissing at inadvertent beats, missing the trees but coating his brand old Nikes. Don't bring up the cold tragedy of a life ending in constant motion, and don't obsess over how cold he looks now, lying there, and how distant physical remnants are. Just say he will be missed in pleasant haiku and bring on the next relative to share some excerpt from the Bible that doesn't mean anything. But who are you to upstage the Bible? You're alive and writing poetry. Be thankful for that and stop trying to reason out unchangeable, unexplainable, holy shit death. Besides, your friend is dead and buried in hollow ground or burned till all that remains is some ash to be scattered symbolically for what you hope are meaningful spiritual conclusions. You'll never know. Stop twirling your mustache. You can't even grow a mustache. Leave the remunerations to Tolstoy and write that poetry, boy. Write that shit. And you can write poetry about someone who lived. Someone who got away just like you, and you'll drown your survivor's guilt in illusion memory of clarity. Find a friend at a funeral. Fuck a friend at a funeral. Now's the time. Who wants to mourn in solid colors? Turn that frown upside down. On your face, spread open and panting sweat till you're both still filled with joy. This really means something. Forget where you are in time and space. Lick down her thighs, light a cigarette, write a poem about that. Life is for the living, orgasms are for the giving. Hey, you rhyme. Aren't you just a regular Dr. fucking Seuss? Write that poetry, boy. Write that shit. And you can write poetry about friends. How they come and go like socks. No. How they come and go like fads. No, it's stupid. How they come and go like friends. Simple, perfect. Friends come and go and come, usually faking on your finger after too many drinks. Then they're not a friend anymore, just a confused naked person on the other side of the bathroom sink saying, this never happened! Or there's someone that you watch movies with, concerts with, baseball with, but you only agree on things with your hashtag for internet frailty. Forget about the fucking long night conversations on bunk beds where you talked about love and identity. That was a long time ago. And now you're not even invited to a wedding to save a few postage stamp problems. Forget about your friends back home. They don't know you. They only know back home. You're not going to evolve in forms of truthful verse for preconceived, predetermined, stunting personality critics. So don't write any truthful verse for preconceived, predetermined, stunting personality critics. Just call them up when you're drunk at 2 in the morning and relive the 2 inside jokes you can barely remember from the Exton Diner back before you disappointed everybody's idea of who you were supposed to be, when you felt the way they were supposed to feel, when you stayed up all night cruising empty neighborhoods where Regina Spektor soundtracked your hapless disappointments. Fuck it. Hang up the phone and write that poetry, boy. Write that shit. And you can write poetry about making new friends. Roses are red, violets are blue. You don't know me and I don't know you. But you kind of like the same shit as me, so we're best friends forever. 1, 2, 3. 3 for the friends I made this year. 2 for the friends who will spot you for beer. 1 for the life I have to live. None for the faith in life to give. God damn, that was cute. And now we're PFFs. OMG, LOL, for reals. Write the poetry, boy. Write that shit. And you can write poetry about falling in love with all the she loves me not daffodils placed like scattered Valentine remnants around your better self. Butterflies swarming with locust education to your walking dizzy, bowled over, vomit in verse. Allude to Wordsworth in spring. Mitigate Shelley in autumn. But don't personify her laugh. That's lame. Don't alliterate her name. That's even lamer. Don't compare it to Greek goddesses you know nothing about. Actually, compare it to Greek goddesses you know nothing about. But use the Roman name just for a literary napkin tickle. She's not reading Plato and Euripides. She's in an empty suburban bedroom with her name spelled above her bed in plastic lettering. She's listening to Coldplay in television. Just don't overstate your hopes and dreams. This isn't about your hopes and dreams. Don't automatopoeia her orgasms. That's gross. Don't compare her to a summer's day. It's been done. Don't wax poetic. That's gay. Don't say gay. That's insensitive. Don't you know she has a gay brother? We all have gay brothers. Just get to the point without being a puppy dog. Get to her heart without being a hornet. And write that poetry, boy. Write that shit. And you can write poetry about falling out of love. But don't make it sound like a Counting Crows song. Nobody listens to 90s alt rock. What the fuck is 90s alt rock? Just add a few nice details about streets and landmark sightseeing soundtracks to resonate, rejuvenate, and email black lipstick wearing zombie and be done with it. Sylvia Plath needs a shadow, and you need to sell some poems. These strippers aren't going to tip themselves. Post your neo-post modern mopey depression poem on a website with message board gratification. Scan the comment section for tagged tweet temperaments all aligned and maligned with your kind, melancholy, James Taylor verse vexed with apathetic heartbreak. Don't bother settling scores with ex-girlfriends. Ex-girlfriends aren't reading poetry. Ex-girlfriends are out doing something called dubstep while they get rubbed rotten through their jeans. Just lower your hat, listen to Leonard Cohen, and write that poetry, boy. Write that shit. And you can write poetry about some more old flames. Let them know what they're missing. All the existential, drunken, depressive moaning, they are fucking missing out. I bet their tall, rich husbands can't subjugate verbs like you. I bet their tall, rich husbands can't quote James Joyce while simultaneously sniffing not-so-great wine through teary-eyed dissertations about being adopted like you. Write that poetry, Oliver Twist. Write that shit. And you can write poetry about music. But don't mention the couplets you're shoplifting. Just mention the Beethoven movement to sound educated. Compare yourself to Woody Guthrie standing on train tracks, picking sunset withdrawals from Equal Rights Renaissance. They don't need to know that you don't actually own a record player. They don't need to know that you're still a little iffy on what EP stands for. Just mention a Beatles album and be done with it. Mention an obscure new wave Springsteen cover, adjust your beanie and call yourself Lena Dunham. Blast some digital streaming scores of something called Arcade Fire, pretend to like it and write that poetry, boy. Write that shit. And you can write poetry about film. Splice together Brando strips of Technicolor treatments, zooms, pans, and panoramic pontification. Color your verbs with backlit film noir neurosis. Track your sentences with Steadicam, Spike Lee moving dolly shot through New York City corridors when Natalie Wood sings, tonight won't be just any night, but you know she's wrong. Tonight's just another song, movie, poem, and you're sculpting stream of consciousness, Michelangelo with penis envy. Poetry isn't popcorn. Poetry isn't some Walk of Fame, long limousine bullshit. Praise the French New Wave with one hand and jerk off Frank Capra with the other. And be eclectic, be acrylic, and assimilate yourself in all the caricatures of tree jacket envy and write that poetry, boy. Write that shit. And you can write poetry about social media. About the computer-generated landscape of language that replaced all forms of sweaty social hands. Turn up your nose. Mock cyber exploration, then quick check your Facebook. Satirize your friends' mopey picture remembrances of 9/11, then quickly check your Instagram. Take self-indulgent selfies and tag them with artsy Oscar Wilde quotes, then quickly scan through the pictures of some girl from high school who used to creep out at study hall and you have to avert your glances. But hey, no averting any goddamn glances now. She fucking friended you. Look at all the comings and goings of your internet friends and you see the following posts. Can't believe my amazing family and friends. Feeling blessed. Can't believe my amazing co-workers. Feeling blessed. That moment when you see your bestie for the first time in a year. Hashtag feeling blessed. After you're done vomiting, take a few seconds and smugly give your own take on this extemporaneous cuddly phenomenon, and you post. My herpes finally went away, feeling blessed. My wife's finally off her period, feeling horny. Had a little trouble on public transit today, feeling racist. That moment when you fall off the wagon, hashtag meth. That moment when you should have pulled out, hashtag abortion. That moment when you wander into a dark alley, hashtag rape. Smile to yourself, click post, and take another in a long series of chugs from the open bottle of Pop-Up vodka. I bet you ruined their fucking night, those happy, well-adjusted, content people that aren't stalking their old friends with the U-porn window open, leering at the bottom of the screen. Yeah, they probably are. But you got one more window open, and you're using it to write that poetry, boy. Write that shit. And you can write poetry about sex. It's not smut, it's poetry. It's not pornography, it's poetry. Cummings yourself a twisted, tawdry verse of clothes dropping and sweat dripping and the passionate throes of lovely verse. Besides, as you're writing and as we're talking, there's some sexy undergrad vibrating herself to a daydream dominance eruption while reading 50 Shades of Grey. You write at least as well as that shit. Make them want you with their words. Remember, the pen is mightier than the sword, and in your case, longer and thicker. You're not going to get them with your looks, you'll get them with your books. Hey, look, you rhymed again. Anyway, seduce them with beatific stanzas, stimulating dirty copulation. Don't say you're fucking them, you're inside them. Don't say fucking, say make love by fire. Does anyone actually make love by fire? I don't know, but they do in your poem. God fucking damn it, that's goddamn Jesus bleeding on the cross, right? They do. Don't say you want your dick in their mouth. Say, taste me. Don't say doggy style. Say, I took her from behind and watched her eyes in the mirror as she bounced violently despite her tender moans or some shit like that. I don't fucking know. Don't say grabbed her ass. In poetry, lightly kissed her neck. Don't say sucked her tits. In poetry, lightly kissed her neck. Don't say I shoved the gag ball in her mouth and tongue fucked all her holes. In poetry, lightly kissed her neck. And after the reading, when 4 library bunnies approach you with Chaucer and blowjobs, say, sorry girls, I don't fuck. I just write. They'll be back. But in the interim of disappointing their Picasso-like fantasies, write that poetry, boy. Write that shit. And you can write poetry about politics. Piss on the face of the man. Unless he's a Democrat. That's right, you liberal socialist, bleeding heart, bearded son of Allen Ginsberg. Tell the party line. But remember, it's a poem. Not a soapbox of Philadelphia for you to perch yourself on like a homeless Abby Hoffman screaming fuck yous to anyone with a stopwatch and temperament. Paint your face white and yell that shit to yourself at home. Or, better yet, watch the news with your wife who leans even farther left than you, Al Sharpton, and Bill Clinton's cum stay combined, and preach to literal choirs of Pete Seeger, circle jerk, jamborees of high-grounded political pundits. You're not going to change the world with your poetry. Poetry doesn't change the world. Poets don't even vote. Poets don't form systems of government. They sit in the corner quietly and then point their fingers when it turns out the cops are assholes and people die in wars. Keep that shit to yourself, and your evolution revolution will rest warmly in your idealistic idiom igloos of righteous indignation. Write that poetry, boy. Write that shit. And you can write poetry about religion. The fairy tale charisma leading people around for centuries of blood and unproven speculation. Find a random believer and quiz him up and down about the Old Testament. Ask him about Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Ishmael. Pour over floods, no pun intended. Fret over famines, alliteration intended after all. This is a poem, not a smart-ass class-counting Bible school lesson where your theological discussions are thwarted by your peers who just want to make paper arcs and airplanes while their parents snore through a morality sermon that would make Rudyard Kipling rename his animals. Apply science to faith and faith to science. Then grant patience to modern-day Americans that just want to feel righteous. Grant solace to modern-day nutcases who just want to feel righteous. Then stop granting things. You're not God. You're a poet. So write a nice poem for all the nice folks who believe in blind misinformation like it was butter and eat bread as if it were the body of God. Who's also the Son of God. Who's also the Christian God. Who's also Jewish. Who also has the same origin story as Superman and Buddha. Whatever. Chalk it up to misanthropic meandering and call it a day. But don't stone you, poet, for not being a believer. Don't stone you, poet, for not being saved. Don't stone you, poet, for not having blind faith in unproven, untaxed, unfounded, unimaginable institutions of violence, genocide, and telemarketing, telekinesis, and the state of Alabama. Don't stone you, poet, for being an infidel. But you would not feel so all alone. Everybody, well, you know how the song goes. If you find an invisible deity to call your own, great. But don't point your finger at somebody else. Whether it's a talking snake, son of God, Haile Selassie, parting seas, Bodhi tree, Tom Cruise as an alien savior god, or literally some guy named Joe Smith finding Jesus in the fucking upstate New York a few years ago. Everybody believes in some form of weird, goofy, social masturbation. Just write that poetry, boy. Write that shit. And you can write poetry about the world! And then pretend that your scope of it reaches farther than Los Angeles cross streets and Hollywood dreams. Google search some country in Africa and sympathize the plight of starving children with a few carefully chosen words about expanding imperialism and guilt. Look at the freeway. Focus in on the fact that everyone in these cars will die. Maybe 20 years, maybe 10, maybe tomorrow. Maybe right now as you crash into them because you're not watching the road because you're too busy writing a fucking poem. Look at the sun. Try to calculate when it'll run out of steam. Your grandkids' lifetime? Your great-grandkids' lifetime? Your great-great-great-great-great-great-great? You want your offspring to witness the end times? Stop fucking your wife! With these thrusts you take, you get closer to further traumatize the unknown offspring to the apocalypse of a sun that just can't burn forever. Throw the poem away! Because who cares? When the sun burns out, there'll be no poetry. There'll be no Shakespeare. There'll be no electricity. You'll all just go black and we'll go the way of the dinosaurs like that. Focus in on how cold and dark it'll be. And feel yourself lift up the ground on a consciousness roller coaster of benign existence. Think about the Big Bang. No, not the time you scribbled a post-orgasm haiku with sticky fingers in the woods, but the Big Bang. When, by chance, the sun survived and threw just enough light on a bouncing blue ball that Jesus, Ben Franklin, and Walt Whitman called home. Think about how close it was to not being here, how close we are to not being here. Let the fear set in, and then you start wishing for your unknown offspring's sake that E.T. was not fiction. Yikes. Write that poetry, boy. Write that shit. And you can write poetry about your wife. But you never seem to get it right. How she looks the way water should sound and sounds the way that melody should look. How she knows you with your eyes open and closed. How she cut you open and carried your blood like heroin afterwards of faded paper. How she loved you in fair and foul and fair and cast a spell on you like a hurly-burly fast food buffet. How she sees you naked and sees your skin and sees your bones and sees your scars. How she knows your voice, knows your touch, knows your eyes, and knows your breath. She fucking knows your breath. She sleeps when you sleep. She moans for you and cries for you and sits for you night after night, year after year, day after day to write a goddamn worthwhile poem. Say fuck it, get divorced and give her the complete works of William Carlos Williams. If she really loves you, she'll know how you're supposed to feel, even if you can't script it. But William Carlos Williams could script it. William Carlos Williams made the grade. Blake appears to you as you're singing in the shower and you scream, thinking William Carlos Williams never screamed. Because William Carlos Williams knew how to write that poetry, boy. Write that shit. And you can write poetry about your children and how they love you unconditionally and how they smile in the morning and smile at night. How they laugh like laughter and cry like laughter and love like laughter and leap in your lap. How you lose your beatnik poetic edge with each snug and bug. Don't explain what that means. It's a poem, not your life story. How you're so afraid that you can't keep them safe in this cold, unforgiving, unequivocally unfair universe. Don't write that. It's a poem, not your recurring nightmares. But it's unconditional. It's love. It's laughter. It's Los Angeles on Sunday morning, and you have two little bear cubs calling you daddy. And they don't care about what a joke you are at work. And they don't care about what a loser you are in Pennsylvania. And they have no idea why you stopped playing their new game, Puppet Go Seek, so you can sit in front of a computer screen spitting reality bullets for hours as you write that poetry, man. Write that shit. And you can write poetry about existence and how each random and obscure beat of your random heart is as each random and obscure word you write. It's chaotic. It's conditional. It's leased by flowers and frogs. It's ruined by human nature, and nature is ruined by existence. Put that in your existential pipe and smoke it, you queasy, boozy sideshow waiting for Godot. Quack, quack, poetry, boy. Quack, quack, quack. And you can write poetry about poetry. And how it never has a beginning, middle, or end. And how it never has a period. And how it gets bigger and bigger and touches the sky, touches the stars, and touches the cosmos with fiery precision, armed with syncopations and rainbow couplets, armed with Shakespeare and William Carlos Williams, armed with Jackson Pollock and John Lennon. And it's your words, and it's somebody else's words. And it's your truths, and it's your lies, and it's your sword and shield. And it's Walt Whitman's unobstructed breath. And you can write poetry about Walt Whitman and how he gave birth to free verse, orgasmic release of expression. How he wrote for the dying and wrote for the breathing. How he let his beard grow long like God. How he changed the world with poetry. How he touched the sky with poetry. How he smoked rolled cigarettes, hovering in between transcendentalism and reality. How he nursed scared sons and brothers on riverbanks in the age of Lincoln and instituted violence. How he wasn't afraid to love men and women. How he wasn't afraid to write poetry for the universe. How he said, I see myself in all people. It is you talking just as much as myself. I act as the tongue of you. I am large. I contain multitudes. And you stop. And you cry. And you cry because you can. And you cry because it's the way you're supposed to feel. And it's you talking to Whitman, and it's Whitman talking to you. And it's the language of unprecedented poetry. It's the laughter of laughter. It's the breathing of love. And it's you writing to Whitman, and it's Whitman writing to you. And it's unconditional. It's the stars, it's the sky, it's the cosmos. It's poetry. It's like Whitman. It's like sex. It's like all that wine and guitar riffs you pick with your eyes. And it's all the love in your heart trying to get out. And it's all the love in your mind trying to get out. And it's all the love and thought in your mind trying so hard to love. And it's good poems knocking on the door, and it's bad poems clearing away the snow from Tuesday morning. And it's the last time that your daughter smiles at you. And it's the last time that your wife says goodnight. And it's the last time that you see the universe with your own eyes, and you feel the way you're supposed to feel, with unconditional, unobstructed breath. And it's Whitman whispering, write that poem.